I never thought I'd wake up with a knife pressed to my throat, staring into the twisted grin of one of my wife's lovers. The blade was cold, biting into my skin just enough to send a shiver of terror down my spine. He leaned in close, his breath hot and reeking of cheap cologne, a sick smile stretching across his face. His voice was low and dripping with mockery as he whispered, "Well, now you're a real cuckold. Watch and see how she really likes it." In that instant, my life became a nightmare. A sharp, vivid horror that was somehow more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My whole body felt frozen under the weight of this nightmare. And there, just beyond him, stood Laura, my wife, the woman I'd built my life around, the one I'd trusted more than anyone in the world. But she wasn't watching with horror or even pity. No, she looked at me with something darker, something chillingly cold, as if I were just a stranger she'd trapped and humiliated for her own entertainment. Laura's lips curved upward, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, as if she were relishing every second of my misery. It was a twisted tableau, one I never could have imagined in my worst dreams. My chest tightened, my throat dry, my mind reeling with a storm of emotions I could barely process. Anger, betrayal, fear. But more than anything, the deep, stabbing realization that this wasn't some mistake, wasn't some misunderstanding. Laura wanted this. She was part of this sick spectacle, and she was enjoying it. "Come on, Daniel," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is what you deserve. Watching while someone who actually knows how to treat a woman takes your place." The words cut deeper than the knife ever could. Every syllable dripped with venom, a raw disdain I hadn't even realized she'd been hiding. Her eyes, once warm, filled with love and laughter, now held only disdain, a darkness I'd never seen before. They seemed to dare me to react, to do something, to prove her right, to show her just how broken I was under the weight of it all. Couldn't look away. I was trapped, humiliated, powerless. A spectator in my own life, forced to watch as my own wife reveled in my downfall. Their laughter filled the room, echoing in my ears, the sound twisting into something cruel and mocking. Every chuckle, every sneer, every whispered insult seemed designed to strip me of my dignity, to tear down whatever remained of my self-worth. Something inside me snapped that night. A cold, hard rage took hold, like an iron fist tightening around my heart. It wasn't the hot, blinding anger I'd felt before. This was something different, something deeper, more relentless. It was the kind of fury that doesn't burn out, that doesn't fade. Digs in, settles, waits. When they were finally done, when the room fell silent and the mocking sneers had faded into echoes, I was left alone in the wreckage of what had once been my life. The silence was thick, suffocating, pressing down on me as I lay there, my mind reeling, struggling to understand how things had come to this. And as I stared at the ceiling, the faint scent of their mockery still lingering in the air, I made a promise to myself. I would never let this go. I would never forget this moment. And I would make sure they regretted every single second of it. They would pay. Every single one of them, Laura and the men who thought they could walk into my life and take what was mine. They thought they'd broken me, but they hadn't. They'd only awoken something they couldn't control, something they'd wish they'd never provoked. In that dark, silent room, I vowed to reclaim my life piece by piece, and to make sure they all remembered that night. Only this time, from the other side. As the days passed, the scene replayed in my head like a broken record. That night haunted me. Every mocking laugh, every smug look. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation on a level I hadn't known existed. I became obsessed with every tiny detail, each one carving deeper into my mind, fueling the rage simmering inside. I started digging into Laura's life, peeling back every lie she'd spun. I'd always known she was good at hiding things, keeping up appearances. But now I could see through it all. The constant girls' nights out, the work trips she'd insist were essential. Every excuse was a cover for her affairs. And it wasn't just one guy. No, Laura had been busy, lining up multiple affairs as if she had nothing to lose and nothing to fear. There was one night in particular that pushed me over the edge. I was following her again, keeping my distance as she left our home, supposedly to catch up with an old friend. I trailed her downtown, watching her meet another guy, a stranger in his 30s, confident, with that same smug look I'd come to hate. I watched as she greeted him, all smiles and flirtation, oblivious to the fact that I was watching. But it wasn't enough just to watch. Not anymore. I took out my phone and snapped photos, one after the other, recording everything. It was time to build my case, not just in a courtroom but in my own mind. Every photo felt like another piece of ammunition, a weapon I'd used to remind her of the hell she put me through. It wasn't about taking it to lawyers or court. Not yet. I wanted to confront her, to unleash the fury I'd bottled up since that night with the knife. Finally, one evening I couldn't hold back. She came home late, acting like nothing was wrong, gliding in as if she were doing me some favor by coming back. But this time, I was waiting for her in the living room, arms crossed, all evidence spread out on the coffee table in front of me. Laura froze as she stepped into the room, her smile dropping when she saw me. "What's this?" she asked, a flicker of uncertainty flashing in her eyes. "What do you think, Laura?" I said, my voice cold and steady, though my heart was racing. "Look a little closer. Recognize anyone in these pictures?" She looked at the photos, her eyes widening as she realized what they showed. But instead of guilt or shame, that look of smugness returned, almost like she was proud of herself. "Oh, so you've been spying on me now?" she sneered, crossing her arms as if she were the victim in this whole mess. "Real classy, Daniel. Guess you've got nothing better to do with your time." Her reaction caught me off guard. I had expected excuses, maybe an apology, something that showed she felt at least a shred of remorse. But instead, she laughed, a low, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Is this what you've been doing? Stalking me? Taking pictures?" she taunted, circling me like a predator sizing up its prey. "I thought you had more self-respect than that." I clenched my fists, every nerve in my body on edge. "Self-respect? You've got a lot of nerve, Laura," I said through gritted teeth. "All those nights you said you were with friends, or on some work trip. All of it was a lie, wasn't it?" She shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "So what if it was? It's not like you had anything better to offer. I found real men, Daniel, men who knew how to treat me. You think following me around like some pathetic investigator makes you look strong? It makes you look weak." That was it. Her words cut deeper than any wound, each one a reminder of how little she cared. I couldn't believe I had ever loved this woman, ever thought she was my partner in life. As she turned to walk away, as if dismissing me and my pain like it was nothing, I felt something snap inside me. "You're not going to just walk away from this, Laura," I warned, my voice low, vibrating with barely contained fury. "Oh, really?" she scoffed, looking back at me with a sneer. "And what are you going to do about it? You can't even stand up for yourself." That night, I realized that revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was a promise. After Laura's sneer and cruel dismissal, something in me shifted permanently. This was beyond heartbreak or betrayal, it was war. She had humiliated me, mocked my loyalty, my love, and my very sense of self. She had no remorse, no shame. She'd made it clear that she saw me as nothing more than a tool she could manipulate, a shadow in her life, too weak to matter. But she was wrong, so wrong. I spent the next few days in a daze, my mind racing as I thought of every way I could make her and her so-called real men pay. I started tracking them, not just to catch her in more lies but to learn everything about these guys. Their routines, their habits, where they hung out. Each day, I felt the fire of anger and determination grow hotter. One night, as I was following one of her lovers, a guy named Brad who worked at a local gym, I saw my chance. He was on his way home, strolling down a dark, quiet street, looking smug as ever. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I watched him walk, that arrogant swagger making my stomach churn. I parked, grabbed the baseball bat I'd started carrying with me, and quietly followed him down the sidewalk. When I was close enough, I called out his name. He turned, surprised to see me, and in that split second of hesitation, I swung the bat as hard as I could. The crack of the bat against his ribs echoed in the night, and he collapsed, gasping in pain. "That's for every lie you helped her tell," I hissed, standing over him, watching him writhe. I wanted to do more, to finish what I'd started, but the sight of him clutching his side, coughing and gasping was enough. He'd remember this night for a long time. He'd know that I wasn't some silent bystander, some cuck in their sick game. No, I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere until they'd all paid. Brad was out of commission for months after that. Broken ribs, a punctured lung, the works. But I wasn't done yet. He was just one piece of this twisted puzzle. There were still others. Other men who thought they could disrespect me, who thought they could step into my life and take what was mine. But I knew I had to play it smart. The satisfaction I'd felt in dealing with Brad was intense, almost addictive, but I knew I couldn't keep using brute force. I needed to be more calculated, more deliberate. Laura and her lovers had pushed me into the shadows, into the dark corners of my own mind, but now I was going to make those shadows work for me. Over the next few weeks, I put my plan into motion. Laura continued her games, sneaking around with her other boyfriends, acting as though I didn't know. But I was always watching, always one step behind her, cataloging every secret, every move. My next target was a man named Travis. He worked at a trendy downtown bar, and I'd seen him with her a few times, arms wrapped around her like he owned her. He was tall, slick, with that cocky charm Laura seemed to adore. But he had one weakness. He liked to drink after his shift, usually alone, nursing a whiskey or two before heading home. One night, I decided to pay him a visit. I showed up at the bar, sitting a few seats away, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't recognize me, too focused on his drink and himself. I waited until he'd had a few, then made my move, sidling up next to him. "Rough night?" I asked, pretending to be just another guy looking for some conversation. He looked over, bleary-eyed, and shrugged. "Same as any other," he mumbled, his voice slurred. I nodded, pretending to sympathize, pretending that I was just another guy trying to blow off steam. "I know the feeling," I said, leaning in a little. "Women can be tough to handle, huh?" He laughed, taking another sip. "You're telling me, got a little lady waiting at home?" "Something like that," I replied, forcing a grin. "They always want more, don't they?" His face lit up, like he'd found a kindred spirit. "You're telling me, I got this one chick married, you know? Husband's clueless. Doesn't know what he's got on his hands." He chuckled, clearly proud of himself. "She's wild, man. If her hubby only knew." I clenched my fist under the bar, barely able to hold back my anger. He had no idea he was talking about me. No idea that the man he was laughing with was the husband he was mocking. But I kept my face calm, nodding along, pretending to laugh. "Sounds like a thrill," I said, keeping my tone casual. "How long you think you can keep it up?" He shrugged. "As long as I want. I'm doing her a favor, really. Poor guy probably couldn't handle her anyway." That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. I left the bar shortly after, leaving Travis to his drink, unaware of what was coming for him. I had a plan for him, a more elaborate one, something that would hit him where it hurt. And Laura, she was going to feel every ounce of the pain she'd put me through. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, and I was just getting started. In the days after my encounter with Travis, I could barely contain the anticipation building inside me. I wasn't acting out of rage anymore. This had become something colder, sharper. Every day, I woke up with one purpose in mind: to bring them down one by one, to show Laura that I was no one's fool. I had laid low after dealing with Brad, careful to keep myself off the radar. But now it was time for phase 2. Travis was about to learn that there were consequences for mocking me, for disrespecting my life as if it was nothing. Laura had brought this upon herself, and if she thought I was weak, she was about to discover just how wrong she was. That night, I waited outside the bar where Travis worked, cloaked in the darkness of the nearby alleyway. The streets were quiet, the air cool, and I could hear the faint hum of music from inside the bar. Travis's shift was almost over, and I knew his routine by heart now. He'd walk out, lock up, and head to the dive bar down the street for his usual post-work drinks. He'd get comfortable, relaxed, maybe even brag to a stranger like he had to me. But tonight, he wasn't getting that chance. I'd set up a small device in his car, a jammer that would disrupt his cell signal. If he tried to make a call, he'd find nothing but dead air. It was a simple trick, but enough to keep him isolated, to make him feel the vulnerability he never thought he'd have to confront. At around 1:30 a.m., Travis finally came out, stumbling slightly as he locked up the bar's door behind him. He didn't notice me as he made his way to his car, fumbling for his keys, his senses dulled by hours of serving and drinking. As soon as he opened the car door, I moved in. "Hey, Travis," I said, my voice cold and steady. He looked up, startled. His eyes narrowed as he tried to place me. "Do I know you?" he slurred. I smirked. "Oh, I think you do. You were just bragging about me the other night. Remember? The poor, clueless husband?" His eyes widened, realization dawning on his face. "Wait, you're—" I didn't give him time to finish. I lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the car. His head hit the metal with a dull thud, and he winced, struggling to push me away, but he was too slow, too drunk to react properly. "Yeah, I'm that husband," I said, my voice low and filled with the months of anger and betrayal I'd bottled up. "You thought you could walk into my life, take what's mine, and laugh about it? Well, laugh now, Travis. Laugh all you want." He squirmed, trying to free himself, but I tightened my grip, pressing him harder against the car. "Listen, man," he stammered, panic in his eyes. "I didn't mean anything by it. I swear. I didn't even know who you were." "Oh, you knew," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "You knew she was married. You just didn't care." He started to say something, but I cut him off, my fist connecting with his jaw in a solid punch that sent him reeling. He slumped against the car, holding his face, a look of pure terror spreading across his features. That was more like it. This wasn't the cocky guy from the bar, laughing about the women he'd stolen. This was a scared little boy who'd finally realized he'd messed with the wrong person. "You know, Travis," I said, crouching down to look him in the eye, "this could have ended differently. If you'd shown an ounce of decency, maybe we wouldn't be here. But you didn't, and now you're going to live with the consequences." He tried to pull himself up, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. "Look, I'll leave her alone, all right? I'll never see her again." "That's not good enough," I replied, a cold smile spreading across my face. "You didn't just take her. You took my pride, my dignity. You treated me like a joke. And for that, I'm going to make sure you remember this night for a long, long time." I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "If I ever see you near her, near my life again, I'll make sure that broken jaw is the least of your problems. Do you understand?" He nodded frantically, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, I get it, man. I swear." Satisfied, I stood up, taking one last look at the pathetic figure slumped against his own car. I didn't feel guilt, not even a hint of remorse. I felt powerful, in control. For the first time in months, I wasn't the victim. I walked away, leaving Travis to nurse his wounds and lick his bruised ego. It was a warning, a reminder that he wasn't invincible. And as I disappeared into the shadows, I knew that my message had been received. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, careful not to draw any attention to myself. Laura hadn't even noticed anything unusual. Her life went on as if nothing had changed, as if her games and lies weren't about to catch up with her. But I had something special planned for her, something she wouldn't see coming. The final piece of my revenge was about to fall into place. One evening, I made sure she'd find me sitting at home, calm, composed, waiting for her to return. When she walked through the door, I gave her a smile, one that must have looked unsettling because she paused, giving me a wary glance. "What's with the look?" she asked, tossing her purse onto the couch. "Just waiting for you," I replied, standing up and motioning for her to join me at the kitchen table. She rolled her eyes, looking like she was preparing herself for another one of our arguments. But this time I was prepared. I had evidence, a plan, and I knew exactly how this conversation would end. "Laura," I said calmly, watching her closely, "let's talk about honesty." She looked at me with a raised eyebrow, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, really? You're the one who's going to lecture me about honesty?" "Oh, I think it's long overdue," I replied, holding her gaze. "Because I know everything, Laura. Everything." For the first time, I saw her composure falter. Laura's smirk faded, her face hardening as she realized this wasn't just another one of our fights. I watched her carefully, savoring the flicker of fear that finally crossed her eyes. She'd spent months hiding behind lies and excuses, but tonight, there was nowhere for her to run. "Daniel," she said, forcing a laugh, trying to regain control. "What's gotten into you? You're acting crazy." I leaned back, folding my arms as I took a deep breath, letting my voice stay calm, almost casual. "Crazy? Maybe. But it's amazing what you discover when you're paying attention. You see, I know all about Travis, Brad, and the others. I know about every single man you've been sneaking around with." Her face blanched for just a moment, and I knew I had struck the nerve I'd been aiming for. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly trying to find a way to twist this back on me. "Don't try to deny it, Laura," I continued. "I have photos, texts. I know where you were last Tuesday and who you were with. So, don't waste my time with excuses." She dropped the act, her face twisting with anger. "So what? You think you're some kind of detective now?" she sneered, folding her arms defiantly. "Following me around, taking pictures like some pathetic creep? Who's the loser here, Daniel? It's not me." Her words were like venom, but I refused to let them sting. I stayed silent, letting her rant, watching her unravel. She didn't realize she was only digging herself deeper. "You're so predictable," she went on, laughing bitterly. "That's your problem, Daniel. You're boring. You're weak. You were never enough for me, and I had to find someone who could actually satisfy me." I clenched my jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. Her words were meant to hurt, to provoke, but I wasn't about to let her take control. Instead, I leaned in, locking eyes with her. "You think I'm weak?" I asked quietly. "You think you can walk all over me without consequences? Because you're wrong, Laura. Dead wrong. You have no idea what I'm capable of." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. You're not capable of anything. That's why I'm here with you, Daniel. You're predictable. You wouldn't dare do anything that might actually change things." I leaned back, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Is that right?" I asked. "You think you're untouchable? Because Brad might have something to say about that." Her face froze, and for the first time, real fear flashed in her eyes. What did you do?" she stammered. "Oh, nothing much," I said casually, shrugging. "Just a little conversation. Maybe a broken rib or two to remind him who he was dealing with. He's had plenty of time to think about his choices in that hospital bed." She took a step back, horror spreading across her face. You're lying. You're not." "Oh, I assure you, I'm very serious," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And if you think that was extreme, you haven't seen anything yet." I could see her trying to process this, the realization dawning that I wasn't the pushover she'd always thought. She tried to mask her fear with defiance, but her trembling hands gave her away. "You're insane," she spat, glaring at me. "You think you can scare me with some empty threats? I don't need you, Daniel. I never did." I shook my head, laughing softly. "No, Laura. You needed me more than you ever realized. I was the one who held this whole charade together. But now I'm taking back control. And believe me, things are going to change." Her mask cracked as she finally broke, screaming at me, hurling insults, trying to tear me down in every way she could. But I stood there, unmoved, letting her exhaust herself. She was unraveling, revealing the person she'd become, and I realized that the woman I once loved was long gone. When she finally stopped, breathing heavily, I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "It's over, Laura. Whatever game you thought you were playing, it's done." "Oh, you think you're done with me?" She shot back, desperation in her voice. "You think you can just walk away? You'll regret this, Daniel. I'll make sure of it." I raised an eyebrow, amused by her threats. "No, Laura. I'm not the one who's going to regret this. I'm moving forward, and you'll be nothing but a painful memory." Her face contorted with rage, but I didn't care. I walked past her, heading for the door, feeling the weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt free. This was the closure I needed, the end of a toxic chapter that had consumed me for far too long. As I opened the door, she called after me, her voice desperate, frantic. "Daniel, don't walk away from me. Don't you dare." But I didn't look back. I stepped out into the night, leaving her there, her voice fading behind me. I'd spent enough time suffering, enough time being her pawn. I was done with her games, done with the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. Outside, the cool night air filled my lungs, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The weight of her deceit, the anger, the resentment, all of it was beginning to fade, leaving me with a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace. I knew that my life wouldn't magically return to normal. There would be scars, memories that would haunt me, reminders of the darkness I'd walked through. But I also knew that I had come out stronger, sharper, and wiser. I'd lost a part of myself to her betrayal, but I'd gained something far more valuable: freedom. And in that moment, I promised myself that I would rebuild, that I would rise above this, and that I would never let anyone else take control of my life again. As I walked away, leaving Laura and everything we had behind, I realized that the worst was over. I'd fought my demons, faced my fears, and found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Walking away from Laura that night was supposed to be the end. I thought leaving her there, consumed by her own lies and anger, would finally give me peace. I'd survived the nightmare. I'd walked out on my own terms. But something about the silence that followed felt too still, too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't truly over. I kept to myself for the next few weeks, focusing on rebuilding the pieces of my life that she'd torn apart. I moved into a small apartment across town, stripped of everything that reminded me of her, ready to start over. It was supposed to be a fresh beginning, a clean slate, but Laura had different plans. Started with messages, dozens of them, flooding my phone every day. At first, they were apologetic, claiming she missed me, that she'd made a mistake. She tried every angle, begging me to forgive her, to come back, claiming we could work through this. It was almost pathetic, but I didn't fall for it. After everything she'd done, I knew there was no going back. I ignored her, deleting her messages, blocking her number. Then came the unmarked letters slipped under my door. They started as apologies, desperate pleas for attention. But when she realized I wasn't responding, her tone changed, taking on an edge of anger. She accused me of ruining her life, of abandoning her, of taking away everything she'd worked for. And as the weeks passed, those letters grew darker, filled with words of rage and resentment, each one like a twisted attempt to drag me back into her web. One night, I came home late from work to find her waiting outside my apartment, her figure dimly lit by the street lamp, shadows casting her face in an eerie light. She was dressed up, hair and makeup done as if she was going somewhere special, but her eyes were wild, darting from side to side as if she was searching for something. "Daniel," she said, her voice strained, almost desperate. "You can't just leave me like this." "Laura," I sighed, the exhaustion weighing on my words. "We're done. It's over. You need to move on." Her expression twisted, a flicker of fury flashing across her face. "Move on? After everything we had? You think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing?" I took a step back, realizing just how far she'd fallen. "I didn't leave you with nothing, Laura. You destroyed everything we had. That was all you." She lunged forward, grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You don't get it," she hissed. You can't just erase me from your life. You're nothing without me, Daniel. Nothing. I pulled away, shaking my head. You're wrong. I've already moved on. The word struck a nerve, and for a split second, I saw a flash of vulnerability. But then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by a cold, detached expression I didn't recognize. Fine, Daniel, she said quietly, stepping back, her voice eerily calm. If that's what you want, then that's what you'll get. She left, disappearing into the night, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure, like maybe this was really over. But the relief was short-lived. A few days later, I woke up to find a threatening message spray-painted across my apartment door. You'll regret this. The words were bold, angry, dripping red like fresh blood. A chill ran through me as I read them, realizing that Laura's obsession wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. That night, I lay awake, every shadow in the room seeming to stretch toward me, every sound magnified by the quiet. I knew Laura had gone off the deep end, but this was something else, something darker, as if she were determined to drag me down with her. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My car tires were slashed. My mailbox was filled with unmarked letters, each one filled with sickening accusations, twisted fantasies about how she'd reclaim me. And then there were the mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night, silent, each one lasting just long enough for me to hear her faint breathing on the other end before she'd hang up. I started losing sleep, the constant paranoia gnawing at me, fraying my nerves. It was like she was everywhere, haunting every corner of my life. I'd escaped her, left her behind, but she refused to let me go. And each day, her actions grew bolder, more unpredictable. One night, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. I froze, a wave of dread washing over me. I hadn't left it unlocked. I was certain of that. Slowly, I pushed the door open, stepping inside, my heart pounding as I scanned the room. Everything looked normal at first glance. But then I saw it, a photograph pinned to the wall. It was a picture of me, taken in my own apartment while I was asleep. Beneath it, scrawled in Laura's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "You can't hide from me." The chill that ran through me was like nothing I'd ever felt. She'd been here, in my home, watching me while I slept. My heart pounded as I ripped the photo off the wall, the realization settling in that I was dealing with someone far more unhinged than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Her presence lingered, every shadow, every creak in the floor sending my heart racing. It was as if she'd become a phantom, a haunting reminder of the life I'd left behind but couldn't fully escape. Desperate, I decided to take things a step further. I filed for a restraining order, gathering every piece of evidence, the messages, the letters, the photos, to build my case. But as I stood before the judge, describing the torment Laura had been putting me through, I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Are you sure you're not overreacting, Mr. Coleman?" he asked, almost dismissively. "She broke into my apartment, Your Honor," I insisted. "She's stalking me. I need protection." But despite my pleas, the restraining order was denied. There wasn't enough concrete evidence, they said. Apparently, a few letters and phone calls weren't enough. I left the courthouse feeling defeated, the weight of her presence bearing down on me heavier than ever. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge, waiting for the next message, the next reminder that she was still out there, watching. And as I drifted off to a restless sleep, I heard it, a faint whisper, like a ghost haunting the darkness. "Good night, Daniel." Her voice echoed softly through the room. I shot up, my heart racing, eyes scanning the shadows. But there was no one there, just silence. The whisper haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice, soft and mocking, lingering in the silence. It was enough to drive anyone to the edge, and I could feel myself slipping. Laura's obsession was escalating beyond anything I'd anticipated. She'd become a ghost in my life, lurking in the shadows, reminding me that she wouldn't let go. I decided it was time to take things into my own hands. Since the restraining order was denied, I knew I couldn't rely on the system to protect me. I had to take control. I couldn't keep living in fear, looking over my shoulder every moment, wondering if she was waiting for me just around the corner. The next day, I hired a private investigator. His name was Rick, a grizzled, no-nonsense guy who had seen it all. He listened as I laid out the whole twisted story. The affairs, the threats, the letters, the break-in. He didn't judge, didn't ask too many questions. When I showed him the photo she'd left on my wall, he nodded, his expression hardening. "You're not dealing with someone who's just angry," he said, flipping the photo back and forth. "This is obsession, Daniel. This is dangerous. Tell me something I don't know," I muttered, the exhaustion in my voice betraying just how much this was wearing me down. "I can track her movements, set up surveillance," Rick offered. "Get you proof that she's harassing you. Maybe with solid evidence, we can convince the court to act." "Fine," I replied, relief washing over me. "Just keep me posted. I want to know everything."